It feels like a lot of your journey has women factored in. Why is this very important to you? Why are the concerns of women a big deal for you?
Yeah, it is because broadly on a development scene, I think it is taking cognizance that as people we're different, we're not the same. And usually when we're doing work or all these interventions, the understanding is I'm just taking a project to this community. But that community is not homogeneous, so it's not the same. The people that are in there are unique, they are different. And if you don't take into consideration those differences, you might find that the intervention you take to them doesn't benefit them. So for instance, you'll say, I'm doing a road project in Gulu, let's say. So it should benefit everybody in Gulu. But if you take into cognizance that women are different from men, girls are different from boys, persons with disabilities are different from those that do not have disabilities, then it drives you to start thinking of the uniqueness and how these people are going to, either benefit or be left out. So that, interests me because, as I said, I'm a social development person. It's really about people. So I want to see that, whatever we're doing, is it benefiting everybody? Who is likely to be left out and why? So taking that extra step, it is, something that I've taken really interest in because, I'm a people person. To really see that, whoever is disadvantaged for various reasons, which in most cases we overlook, is able to be brought on board. For instance, if you construct that road and you're not taking into consideration, this blind person, you're not taking into consideration this person that uses a wheelchair and then make provision, it is not going to benefit that person.
When you speak about all the people and their uniqueness, and you speak about these particular groups, my mind goes to refugees. So I'm also, is that an area that you are heavily invested in?
Yes, it is, because when we talk about people, you're looking at especially those that are going to be left behind because of the disadvantaged position that they're in. So refugees, by virtue of how they come into the country, they are not Ugandans. They come, they are displaced. They are looking for how to settle in. So in most cases, they are one of those groups. If you don't pay keen attention, they will be left out, just like all these other social groups that I've talked about. So yeah.
So you've spoken about it with your development hat on. On a more personal level, how do you become this person that is heavily interested in these specific groups? You said your specialization is women, but now you're also speaking about refugees. How did I don't know what you studied, and was this leading up to where you are now? Why is this so important to you?
Yes, in terms of what I studied, my undergraduate is, like teaching, so that obviously brings me into interaction with, people, children, parents, communities that bring, these children into the school. So I have a training in education, but also like my father studies has been in, social development with speciality in gender and women. So yeah, but also being a woman, being a girl that has grown up in these communities. I come from the eastern, from Busoga region. Really, that drives me in terms of seeing, for instance, how girls in Busoga getting, pregnant at a very early age. It really drives me to see that, what more can I do to address some of those disadvantages that affect people from the community that I come from, to be able to uplift them where I can make a contribution.
So this is a climate change podcast, and so we talk about a lot of things that deal with around climate change. But every time we have a conversation on climate change and we say, it's affecting women in major ways, we have all these questions around, why are you focused on women? So with your gender hat on, how are women affected by climate change in ways that maybe men are not affected? What's unique about women in this context?
Yeah, I think it's we start with an understanding that society groups us differently, what we call gender. That beyond me being a woman biologically, there is a way that society defines me. It gives me roles. So by virtue of being a woman, society expects me to be, the one that takes care of the children, the one that, for instance, fetches water for my household, the one that expects me to, to take care of, for instance, people in my household when they fall sick. That is, if they are children, if they are relatives. So their roles, by virtue of how society defines us differently between men and women, that then when we start to talk about climate change, we put on that hat of bringing that understanding. For example, if we talk about, climate change or extreme weather, whether it's hot or cold, that comes with an effect. And by virtue of the roles of women, that makes them, be affected differently. For example, it is the women that provide, let's say, wood, fuel for the household. They will go out, look for the firewood, women or girls. So when we have this climate change, because, forests have been cleared, that role of theirs becomes even harder. It becomes very hard for them to start provide that wood fuel for the household. It is a responsibility of women or girls to fetch water. Because of climate change, water sources are drying up. It now becomes more difficult. The girls are going to be moving, or even the women are going to be moving longer distances to find that water. If they are moving longer distances, in most cases it will affect on, for instance, for the girls, it will affect on their hours that they put into school. Either they will be arriving school late, or in most cases even missing, classes because of the roles that women have in society. We are expected to be the ones that provide food for our households. If you look into agriculture, somebody may say both men and women are involved in agriculture. But we know that women grow different crops from men.
Give me an example.
An example, in most cases, the food garden will be for the woman. You're the one that is growing the beans, you're the one that is growing the potatoes. And then the man, because society expects him to be providing economically, they would possibly going into cash crops. They will be the ones that are responsible for the coffee and all that. So because our responsibility is to provide food, climate change is making it harder for women, to produce, to grow that food and put it, provide it for the household. That, of course, brings in other secondary effects that there is already, we know that there is violence in these households. When I don't do my role as a woman, that has been driving violence in my household.
If I delay,
why is there no food today, or why is the food delayed, he's not going to understand it's because it's taken me longer to get the firewood, or now, because of the heat or the floods, there is now very little reserve of the food that we have. What I produced, for instance, last year, I've not been able to produce the same. So that drives violence again for women. And we are not, in most cases, not relating it to
climate change. Yeah.
So women are affected differently because of, the roles. The care burden now increases, because you're the one that is caring, providing for the household. Because of this additional effect of the climate change, that burden now is also becoming, becoming bigger for you. Research has also shown that there are effects around maternal health and child health that are driven by climate change. In extreme heat, that has been linked to stillbirth or even abortions for women. We're also seeing that, for instance, prevalence of malaria is going up because of the changes of weather. That directly affects child health. Women are responsible for
the well-being of these children,
or taking the children to hospital and all that. So all that comes back to to their responsibilities that society has assigned them, or they are expected to provide in the household. We also know that there are more women that are involved in agriculture. They are providing over 78% agricultural labor compared to women. Climate change is making already agriculture difficult for everyone, but it will be much harder now for the women, because men, again, by advantage that society provides them, they are able to go out, for instance, and ride borders. They are getting off agriculture. Women are still fully dependent on, and they have little alternatives. So again, in terms of the livelihoods and the incomes, there are more, effects for women because they are reliant a lot more on
agriculture.
And all that. So I could go on and on in terms of...
Do we have figures beyond the figures around how many women are participating in agriculture? Do we have any data that speaks to the effects of climate change on women specifically?
Of course, there are researchers. It's not really detailed. For instance, we could not really point on, percentage of figures of, for instance, in terms of maternal health, what is that? But, research is growing. Right now, we can't point you to figures. Again, malaria, we'll just say there is a surge, in the malaria prevalence, but then you're not able to, to directly link. But over time, I think that the data is growing. We are also encouraging that as we do these researches, can we do, a lot more deeper analysis that then provides us, with a lot more data.
Can we relate health to climate change that then affects the women's work in the farms, for example? I'm just thinking that might be, if we're able to relate climate change, agriculture, and other sectors, it could be one way to bring this information to be more believable for people who think we're just always trying to make it simpler for women.
Absolutely. For instance, if you say, okay, if you're having now more malaria cases, and because that is not, properly diagnosed and treated on time, it's ending up in, in admissions or hospital care. How many hours of work is the woman spending, caring for the sick child or for the sick relative, and not being put into, economic use? I think that modeling can be done, but it takes a bit of, effort and influencing to say, please take it, a level down so that it gives us the data, and then people are not saying you're only wanting to talk about women all the time. Yeah.
does climate change affect men in any way that's different from, that stands out?
It does, of course. Climate change has an effect for all of us.
Yeah.
I think to start with. And I say because society now assigns us different roles, it's, that brings in the differences or the differential impact that it has. So again, for men, they are also involved in agriculture. They are still, society expects them to be the breadwinners, much as we know that, dynamics have changed in a certain way. So because of that large effect of, on agriculture, they are not earning as much as they used to. But then society still expects you as a man to be the breadwinner, to provide. So obviously, it will affect them in those ways in terms of, the roles that they have to play, especially in terms of providing for their households. Yeah.
And you spoke a little earlier about refugees as one of those areas that are of interest for you. And we know that Uganda plays a large role in terms of how many refugees it has in the country. How have you seen in the research that you've done, but also in the work that you're doing in development, have you seen the refugee community affected by climate change, specific ways for them?
Yeah, specific ways for them. First of all, as they've come in. Yes, we have a policy that is supportive. They are allocated, land. That's a very small,
30 by 30.
30 by 30. But then they have to live off that land, till it. It is small to begin with. But also because of climate change, the productivity will be low. It is small, it's limited in terms of, how much you can grow. But also because of climate change, the productivity of that land is lowering. So that, affects them, obviously. There will be, very little food that, they can put on the table. We all know that, again, largely they are still dependent on wood fuel for cooking. So accessing, wood, and then if obviously now this will bring in the women aspect, refugees, but then women aspect, because it is the women that are looking for firewood. That is really, really very hard for them. So yeah, they are quite affected. But also by nature of the areas where
the settlements,
what we call the settlements or the refugee hosting districts. We know those are districts again that are being faced by extreme climate changes, and when disasters strike, those areas are more affected compared to we know that West Nile, of course, it's been hotter than everywhere else. So that's when we see refugees really being more disadvantaged compared to the rest of the population. Yeah.
The vulnerabilities that you've been speaking to for the refugees, but also for women, and for women especially, is there an intersection between those vulnerabilities and then think about our, how do I say, cultural norms? Could you explain cultural norms for people who are listening and constantly hearing us saying all cultural norms in communities affect women's participation in this and that? Is there an intersection between the way climate change affects women and the specific norms in their communities or their socioeconomic status?
Yes. So norms in a very simple manner, I think that is what I've been talking about earlier on, is society defines a set of behavior, set of roles, set of practices. Those are all like norms, what we think is normal to us. Because, for any, I'll give an example, of course, for myself again, I'm Soga woman. You expected to be the one cooking in your household. That is like a norm.
A normal.
Yes, a normal. that when they find a man in the kitchen, they'll say, oh, that man is bewitched, or that woman is actually ruling the man, or, things like that. You're not man enough in your house. So society, defines those, the set of behavior, the set of practices, the set of, what roles do we engage in. So that is how then, this whole effect comes in. The climate change comes, it finds us with those, behaviors, or those, what we call the norms. And because those behaviors set us in different positions, the social behaviors or the social norms that society has placed upon us put us in different positions. For instance, the girl is expected to fetch water, let's say. The boy is maybe not supposed to be doing those household chores. So as they are playing football, the girl is actually washing the dishes, is helping the mother in the kitchen to cook, is caring for their younger siblings. So because of those norms that society has placed upon us, it brings in that differential aspect. For instance, because the boy is freed, they will have a lot more time to be reading. And the girl, because much of the day they are spending it in chores, they are possibly expected to be catching up in the evening. But because there is no lighting, in the household, that opportunity also goes away. Or they may end up getting late to school because they had some chores to begin with, while their brothers are ahead of, they've gone to school much earlier. Or if there are choices to make, because climate change will also, if we say it's affecting incomes, that means, the household has to make certain choices.
Who is going to school?
Who is going to school, who is staying back. The girl, tomorrow you'll be married. The husband will provide for you. You don't need to get a lot of education. So let your brother go. So those kinds of things then, at times we don't get to relate them to
climate change. I was actually just thinking about all the newspaper articles and news stories about girls walking long distances to fetch water and getting raped on the way, and that's the end of school. But then you have teenage pregnancies and things like that. There really is a lot to relate to climate change. I don't think we are intentionally looking. What have you seen the communities that you've worked with, or from the work that you're doing in development, what have you seen as strategies that women refugees have started implementing on their own as a way to cope with climate change?
Yeah, quite a lot. I'll speak about maybe specific interventions, but I'll also speak about like broad approaches that can help us to, or that we have seen, help address this. So things like smaller things like, let's say, kitchen gardens that,
What's a kitchen garden?
A kitchen garden is, like just behind, in your backyard. You grow vegetables around, you grow, simple things like tomatoes. That is going to ease, because your role as a woman is to provide food. So if you have like a backyard garden, small garden, where you can easily get, these vegetables, it eases for you to, be able to put food on the table. But it also eases, you walking longer distances to try and find, because we know, especially during those harsh times, people are looking for these vegetables all over. So if you have one in your backyard, it's a lot much easier to water. It is on a small scale, so it eases. But you can also have like some extra income when you have enough that you can, provide for the family, and have a bit extra, you're selling off those and, you know, getting an income. So we are seeing very small interventions like those of, you know, for instance, amongst refugees of, if you do these smaller gardens with your smaller plots of land, don't look at people who have acres and they are growing, you know, on a very large scale, you know, things that require large pieces of land. You could even do these, you know, smaller things like vegetables, like tomatoes and all those, and still be able to earn, you know, earn from it. But also approaches like, you know, if you're taking an intervention to a community, please don't only speak to men, try and speak to women as well. Because in most cases we know by, again, virtue of our society that it is men who are leaders. So when you go to speaking to communities about the interventions you're taking to them, please try and look out for the women as well. They may not be into the leadership group. So if you just stop at just speaking to the leaders, you might miss the issues of the women. So try and, as much as possible, be intentional on ensuring women can participate in all these conversations that you have at those lower levels. At times, you know, women may not speak in those bigger meetings. So when you bring men and women together, you know, they may, except for a few that are very bold, because again, society doesn't expect you to speak when a man speaks, or, you know, so some of these things look like they are 100 years back, that we still live with them on a day-to-day. So if you want to find very specific issues, try and make, you know, separate groups, especially for women and all that. But also on a much higher level, policy level, you know, when you do the analysis, don't just stop at, we had a flood in Teso or in Kumi, you know, can you take it at a much lower level to do the analysis of who is most affected, you know? This is when we will be able to bring out those specific issues. Smaller interventions like, you know, village savings groups. These are things that are, for instance, what we call safety nets or protective measures. That, for instance, if a woman has cultivated this season and because of the climate change, they've not been able to harvest, at least they have a village saving group where they can go and, you know, borrow
get some money.
You know, so you're not putting money only into bigger things, banks. Women are not able to access loans in banks because it requires them to have collateral. They do not have land titles. It requires them, you know, feel this, feel that, feel that. They're not that much level, you know, with that much level education. So very small things that look, many times we underlook, like you do not know how much the village savings have done in terms of empowerment. This is where women would run to for quick loans. They are known, they already have the capital among us, you know, their fellow women or their fellow communities, so they are not going to ask them X, Y, and Z, bring titles and all that. There is trust already. So those, they can access very quick loans, low interest, but also, you know, they have saved some money, you know, so it's a fallback position for them. So those kinds of smaller interventions really work. Yeah.
I think it's difficult for people who, I'm sure you on social media platforms, so you hear the conversations around women in the kitchen and microwaves and so on. So it can be difficult for them to understand that we still have communities where women are this heavily impacted, where women are still struggling to get loans or, you know, so it's very important that you're able to break that down for us and show us the reality in the communities that are far away from our social media platforms. Where do you see the private sector, government, development actors coming together to work together to address the impact of climate change on women and refugees?
Yeah. There is quite a lot. For instance, for private sector, I think being intentional, as I talked about it much earlier, of who are you working with, you know, and whoever you're working with, do you see women, you know, in those groupings? If you're not seeing them, find out why, and then what would help to bring them on board. I'm glad, for instance, we are beginning to see, let's say, banks being able to make, like, you know, women-only, you know, enterprises, or women-only, you know, investment clubs. That is not just, you know, for the sake of it. I think it's recognizing that there are real barriers, you know, for women that hinders them to come in the mainstream. And it is going to require you to, you know, go that extra mile to remove that, you know, barrier. Where are women invested? You know, if you're not giving, for instance, loans or capital for agriculture, you know, you're leaving out the 78 plus women who are, you know, in this sector. So what are private sector doing in terms of increasing, you know, investment in agriculture or financing for agriculture, but even being intentional on that financing actually benefiting women? Are you working with, you know, smaller women groups? Are you working with, you know, those smaller village groups or village savings groups? So those spaces where you'd find women, I think there is really need to be a lot more intentional. And this is again not for the sake of just reaching out to them, because usually this is the mindset. You just want to reach out. Yes, it is the right thing to do to start with, but there's also real business in getting women on board. To start with, you know, there are more women than men in this country, but also globally in terms of the population. You know, there are more women.
I was going to ask you, where are the returns? And that's where private sector is asking.
Yes.
In investing in these groups, which, you know, your refugees do not have national IDs. They're not going. They might run away with our loans. Women, you've already told us, they don't have the capital. They don't have any collateral that they're going to bring to the bank. Where is the return for?
So in terms of widely about the market, by population, there are more women in any community, you know, but also for Uganda at a national level, there are more women. So really any investment would be looking at where is the market, you know. So there is real returns in. But we also know that, you know, in terms of productivity, this has been proven again by research that, you know, when you invest in women, because already they are providing more labor. When you invest, you know, in women, remove the barriers or reduce the barriers, it obviously will increase productivity for you. And also, again, research has shown women are more trustworthy, especially with these loans, and, you know, they will pay back. And this is research, it's documented in terms of, you know, payback, you know, of loans. I think women are doing more, you know, doing better than. So I think there is real, I would say there is a business case, there's return on investment when, you know, you remove barriers for women at different levels. And it's, you know, it is the right thing to do. It is smart in terms of economics or returns on investments that you'll make in any sector.
Is that where governments can play a role in removing some of these barriers?
Obviously, government has a role to play. As I said, in terms of, you know, of the policy, that we do not set, you know, blanket policies, but you're always cognizant and conscious of, you know, does this policy work for all? If not, then where is the gap, and what do we need to be, you know, filling in that then doesn't leave out certain people? But also in terms of investments, some of these bigger public investments that they need to make, that makes it easier for private sector then to build on. And increasingly, you asked about the data, provide the data, because it is already shown, there are these gaps, women are affected differently. But if we don't have the data, it makes it hard for us to sell the story. So if government does, those big surveys they do, national household survey, the census that we just concluded, make that data available, do that deep analysis that shows, this is where the women are, this is where they are missing, this is where, what it means for them if you do X, Y, and Z. So that analysis and the data is really crucial. Yeah.
Where do development agencies fall in this picture?
Again, it is really, again, in research, in testing out things and saying, putting the evidence out there. We have tested this, it really works. We have tested that, for instance, if you do a smaller intervention like that reduces the burden for women in terms of cooking, reducing their hours, reducing the amount of wood fuel they need, things that may just look like a waste of investment, it is actually
that the private sector would never invest in.
Yes, they would never. So it's really for us development agencies continuing to pilot and testing those things and putting the evidence out there, but also engaging with, I think, working very closely with the private sector to bring them into to start to make investments so that it doesn't look like all the time it has to be grants. You can go, if it is proven there is a market, for instance, for energy saving, stoves. Invest in that, things like, that would bring ease access of water for communities, make investments in those. So I think it's really for us as development agencies beginning to work very closely with private sector and showing that there's value, economic value, much as the social value is also important in investing in some of these interventions that we have supported.
What should I take away from this conversation around how climate change is affecting all of us, but especially women, especially refugees, and what is my call to action?
Yeah, if I can, enumerate it quite quickly, I think first and foremost, we need to recognize that when climate disasters happen, women will be, they'll be more affected. In most cases, there will be more women losing lives, or there will be more women that are more injured from these climate disasters for many reasons. They have lesser access to information. They have limited mobility, again, for very known reasons. Some women are at times restricted on their movement, so they are not, their mobility is quite affected.
And they have childcare responsibilities.
They have childcare responsibilities. So in terms of disasters, there are more women that either will lose lives and more injured. Secondly, we know that there are more women in agriculture compared to men, and the effects of climate change directly to agriculture are known. So affecting directly the productivity of women, their livelihoods, their incomes. Again, climate change or crises increases the burden of care for women. They already have the care responsibilities, and now the climate changes make it harder for them in terms of how they access fuel, how they access water, and all the health challenges that come with exacerbation of the climate crises. So really, again, we know that climate crises affect those in poverty more than anyone else, and women make a larger proportion of people that live in poverty. So in a very quick summary, I think we can highlight those areas.
What's an individual's call to action, hearing you say all of these things and just pointing out how climate change is affecting women more? What should they do with this information?
I think to begin with, it's a call for all of us to start to look at, the way we interact, the way we protect, the way we manage our environment. I think that is a call to every individual. Let's be conscious. The effects of climate change are here with us, and they affect all of us. So the call is, let's all be very conscious on how we manage the environment. But also, more specifically, is when we make these interventions that are helping, to adapt or to help people build back when they're affected. Let's be intentional on reaching out to women. Because if we are not intentional, they will be left out, but then they bear,
the biggest brunt of
the crises. So let's be intentional on reaching out to women and to girls. Yeah.
Thank you, Betty.